Imagine this scene. Okay, we're going back maybe 700 years, deep inside a cave in Spain. Not a battlefield, but, well, something just as brutal happened there. A group of people killed, their bodies dismembered, cooked, and eaten. It's pretty shocking stuff. It really makes you rethink what we assume about, ancient human behavior. So today, our deep dive is heading straight into that discovery, El Mirador Cave. We're going to unpack the evidence for this late Neolithic event. We're looking at some really groundbreaking archaeological papers, stuff that's, well, changing the history books.
Yeah, and finding something like this, it's a huge challenge for researchers. I mean, as one of the co-authors, Paul Mirasaldi, put it, cannibalism is just incredibly complex to interpret. It's hard enough to understand humans consuming other humans, but then you've got all our modern biases layered on top. We tend to just jump to barbarism, right?
Yeah.
So the work here, it demands just extreme care, letting the bones speak for themselves without our assumptions getting in the way.
That difficulty you mentioned, how do researchers even start to peel back those biases, especially with something so sensitive? Like, what was the first hint at El Mirador?
Well, the site itself, El Mirador Cave, it's in the Sierra de Atapuerca. That's a really famous archaeological area in northern Spain, a real hotspot. And it's worth remembering, this isn't actually the first time we've seen signs of, well, human consumption in this region. It has come up before. Yeah, like back in the early Bronze Age, also at Atapuerca, they found remains of 6 people and their skull caps. Might have actually been used as containers, maybe for some kind of ceremonial consumption. And then over at the Grandolina Cavern nearby, since the 90s, they've pulled out over 160 human bone fragments. And get this, over 30% of those showed butchering marks, slice marks, scrape marks, chop marks, clear signs. So yeah, the area has a history with this kind of thing.
Okay, so Atapuerca wasn't new to this, but the specific find at El Mirador, the one involving 11 individuals from those 2 cave sectors, that was different, right? What made this study stand out?
I think it was the sheer scientific rigor they applied. The methodology was just incredibly thorough. They looked at, over 5,000 human remains? 5,056 to be exact, using high-powered microscopy, spotting the tiniest details. Then, to figure out when this happened, they did radiocarbon dating on 8 different samples. And to work out if these people were locals or outsiders, they used strontium isotope testing on 5 bones. Whoa, hang on. Strontium isotope testing. Can you break that down a bit? How does that tell you where someone was from? Sure. So think of strontium like a kind of chemical postcode in your bones. It's an element we absorb from the food and water around us, right? And the specific type, the isotopic ratio, varies depending on the local geology. So by analyzing the strontium in ancient bones and comparing it to the signatures of different areas, you can figure out if someone grew up locally or if they moved there from somewhere else. Yeah. And in this case, it nailed it down. They were locals.
That's amazing. So, okay, they've done all this rigorous testing. They're looking super closely at the bones. What did they start seeing? What were the actual signs that made this so, well, disturbing?
Well, the signs were pretty unmistakable, really. Under the microscope, they found those clear slice marks, scrape marks, chop marks we mentioned. But it went further. Evidence of burning, like cremation, peeling on the bone surface, fractures from breaking them open, and really telling actual human tooth marks. It just paints this incredibly vivid and, grim picture.
And all those different marks together, that tells a story that's more than just, say, a desperate act of survival. It's more deliberate.
Absolutely. The whole pattern suggests these individuals were systematically processed, skinned, flesh removed, bodies taken apart, disarticulated, and then cooked and eaten. It wasn't random or rushed. It was methodical. And we can get really specific about what those marks mean. Cut marks, right? Found on 132 pieces. These weren't accidental. They were placed in ways that showed defleshing, skinning, cutting joints apart, dismembering, even taking out the organs, like slicing marks on skull fragments, consistent with cutting away jaw and face muscles. Chop marks near the base of the skull suggest breaking it open, maybe to get to the brain. They saw similar stuff on jawbone slicing, scraping for removing meat from the face and neck area, cuts on collarbones, shoulder blades, pointing to taking meat from the neck and shoulders, marks on neck bones, 19 rib fragments, suggesting taking the ribs apart, defleshing the upper back, removing viscera, and just tons of marks on the long bones, arms, legs, even hands and feet, all about stripping muscle and taking the body apart.
Wow. So head to toe, it sounds less like scavenging and more like butchering an animal almost. That level of systematic processing, what does that suggest about why they were doing it? It can't just be hunger, can it?
It implies a level of thoroughness that seems to go beyond just needing food, yeah? And besides the cut marks, they found percussion marks on 245 bits. Skulls, long bones, mandibles, even small hand and foot bones. These are things like pits, impact notches, abrasions, all consistent with breaking bones open to get at the marrow inside, and maybe the brain too. And then there was this thing called peeling on 43 pieces. A lot of those also had cut marks. And interestingly, 41 showed something called pot polishing. All points towards handling during butchery.
And you mentioned human tooth marks. That's about as direct as evidence gets, isn't it? What can you tell from those specific marks?
Exactly. Super direct.
They found them on 157 specimens, mostly on smaller, more fragile bones, like from the hands, feet, ribs. And the marks themselves had specific shapes, crushing, little cracks, pits, grooves, sort of scooped out areas. When they compared these to marks made in experiments, yep, confirmed human origin. And here's a kicker. 155 out of the 161 bones with tooth marks also showed signs of that pot polishing.
Pot polishing. That sounds specific. What exactly is that? What does it look like? Right, so pot polishing, they've found it on 585 bones in total. It means the broken edges of the bones look kind of rounded, smooth, shiny, almost translucent. It's a classic sign that the bones have been tumbled around in a pot, likely being boiled or cooked. On top of that, 222 remains showed color changes from being burned, like in cremation. And for 69 of those, they found butchery marks right alongside the burn damage. Some bones even had this distinct brown heat line, which tells you they were put near a fire when they were still fresh, but after the flesh had been removed. It all just pieces together this very clear sequence of processing. And the dating nailed it down pretty precisely. Radiocarbon dating put this whole episode somewhere between 5,700 and 5,570 years ago, late Neolithic. The pattern suggests it was either one single event or maybe a few episodes really close together in time, which also clearly separates it from that earlier Bronze Age stuff found elsewhere at Atapuerca. And like we said with the Strontium isotopes, these 11 people, they were locals from that area. And the evidence suggests they were consumed pretty quickly, maybe just over a few days. So an intense, short-lived event, not something drawn out over a long time.
Okay, so you have this mountain of incredibly specific, frankly gruesome evidence. How did the researchers sift through the possibilities? How do they land on cannibalism and rule out other explanations, like maybe strange burial practices or just sheer desperation?
That's absolutely the critical next step, isn't it? You have the data. Now, what does it mean? And they were very careful. He systematically looked at alternative ideas and explained why they didn't fit the evidence. Really rigorous science. First, they considered funerary rituals. Okay, some ancient cultures did mess with bodies after death, removing skulls, disarticulating them. But the patterns at El Mirador, far too extensive, way more systematic. Proper butchery, not just a few ritualistic marks you might see on, say, 1 to 5% of remains in some burial contexts. Plus, the fact that this seems to be a very localized event happening quickly, that doesn't really fit with the idea of a recurring, established ritual practice, like endocannibalism often is. Second thought, maybe just violent injuries. From weapons, sure, stone or bone weapons can leave slice and chop marks, yeah. But those are usually concentrated on areas like ribs and vertebrae, typical combat injuries. The El Mirador pattern was totally different. Clear signs of taking everything, meat, organs, marrow, brain, from all over the body, not just combat wounds.
Right. And the big one, famine. That's the go-to explanation people often have for ancient cannibalism, isn't it? Just desperate survival.
Exactly. And they checked that very carefully, too. They looked at the paleo-environmental data, what the climate and environment were like back then. They found no signs of conditions that would cause severe, widespread food shortages. It was described as a typical Mediterranean mixed forest. Evidence suggested diverse food sources were available and generally adequate nutrition for the communities living there. But the clincher really was the victims themselves, the age range. You had at least 3 young children, under 7, 2 adolescents, maybe 10 to 17, and 4 adults, including someone over 50. That broad spectrum, it just doesn't match what you expect from famine deaths. Famine usually hits the most vulnerable hardest, the very young and the very old. This was more like a cross-section of a group.
So fair.
Wow. If it wasn't ritual, wasn't just injuries, wasn't famine, and it was this intense short-term event involving local people being systematically processed, what did the researchers conclude? What was going on in that cave? Well, the conclusion they reached is pretty stark. One of the co-authors, Francesc Marginedes, summed it up. He said, essentially, this wasn't a funeral tradition. It wasn't a response to starvation. The evidence points towards a violent episode. It happened very quickly. And it was possibly the result of conflict between neighboring farming communities. And that fits into a bigger picture archaeologists are seeing now. More and more evidence points to widespread violence between groups during the Neolithic. Remember, this is the time when farming is spreading. Big social changes, population growth. That often leads to pressure on resources, competition, and, violent conflict. So they proposed a warfare cannibalism idea Maybe these 11 individuals, perhaps a family unit, were killed in one go by another group, a neighboring group, or maybe outsiders. Another researcher, Antonio Rodriguez Hidalgo, called it a kind of ultimate elimination. He noted that even in these smaller-scale Neolithic societies, you can get these violent episodes where enemies are consumed as a way to completely dominate or destroy them. And it's important to remember, just because they didn't find lots of obvious weapon injuries on the bones doesn't rule out violence. Many ways to kill someone don't leave a mark on the skeleton.
So not just killing, but consumption as a final act of destruction or dominance in a conflict. A whole family, perhaps. That's incredibly chilling.
It really is. And this event at El Mirador, while similar in scale to other Neolithic massacre sites found in places like Germany or elsewhere in Spain, it stands out because of the explicit evidence for cannibalism alongside the violence. And significantly, this episode seems to line up with the end of the Neolithic occupation of that cave. It suggests this wasn't, normal behavior for the people living there. It seems like it might have been a final, terrible event that brought that chapter to a close for that community.
So today we've really gone deep into this quite shocking find at El Mirador Cave, Neolithic cannibalism. We've seen how careful forensic work let researchers rule out things like famine or burial rites, and pointed instead towards a brutal conflict between communities, a really stark glimpse into our deep past.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how this single, intense event challenges our neat ideas about ancient societies. It's a stark reminder that the shift to farming, the Neolithic Revolution, it wasn't all just about progress and pottery, It was also a time of intense competition, sometimes with incredibly dark results for people. And if you think about that bigger picture, it really makes you wonder about the deep, deep roots of human conflict. How far back does that impulse go to not just defeat, but utterly eliminate an enemy?
A profound and, unsettling thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We really hope you keep exploring these complex and sometimes difficult sides of human history.